Hey friends! Welcome to the Drug Prevention Power Hour, where we empower leaders in youth drug prevention. After creating a student-led movement hosting epic drug-free events across the nation, your host, Jake White, dedicated himself to making the prevention field more fun, impactful, and relevant for today's youth. So if you're in education, counseling, public health, prevention, or just a caring adult looking for strategies to protect your kids, we hope you subscribe and learn from every show. Coming to you from Jake White and his team at Vive 18. Enjoy this episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour. I'm your host, Jake White from Vive 18, and today we are hanging out with a new friend, Robert. And Robert is from this new club. I didn't know about it, but it sounds really, really interesting. And it's called the Explorers Club. The Explorers Club. And he's from the Southwest chapter. So Robert, I'm just really excited to get to know you a little bit, to chat about what you're doing. Because you're doing some work with youth as well right now and starting out your journey with that. But it sounds like you've had a lot of journeys so far.
Yeah, I did. I got started early on the journey part of it. The Explorers Club, while we're on it, it's the oldest, most prestigious club in America for exploration. When you step into the door of their clubhouse in New York, there's a plaque that has members' accomplishments. And it says, first to the top of the highest mountain, first to the bottom of the ocean, first to the moon, first to Antarctica, first to the North Pole. And they left a space for first to Mars, so... These days,
That's
it's more
cool.
about conservation. People like Jane Goodall and
Okay.
David Attenborough, people like that. So it's I've been a member for 25 years. I've been in charge of the Southwest chapter for 7. And in the 4 Southwestern states, there's 88 of the best scientists and explorers in the world that I know them all on a first name basis, and I follow their science. And it's just been such a great relief these days to be able to tap into, to talk to someone that's using AI to talk to sperm whales, or that's leading the charge to clone the dwarf mammoth, which is one of our best hopes for the Arctic, turning into like another set of lungs for the planet,
Wow. That's amazing. And that's really cool to see the application of it, because I saw that on your bio and just Googled it a little bit. And it feels like it's just a place for scientists to explore. And it's written there, right? Like land,
Yeah,
sea, space.
by everything. It's just every time I go there, I'll be sitting there talking to somebody, and after a couple minutes, they pull these things out of their hat. This guy I've known for 10 years told me the other day that he once took 3 years to retrace Marco Polo's journey from Venice to Asia and back. I've known him for 10 years. Didn't know he had that in his sleeve. Another woman I didn't know, she did the piloted the Mir submersible that brought James Cameron down to the Titanic. They're just
Wow.
humble people that have done an awful lot. I met
That's
Neil Armstrong
fascinating.
once and talked to him for 45 minutes, not knowing who he was. And all we talked about was parks in Africa we'd each been to, just very humble people.
Yeah,
So
that's
well,
cool. I'd love to get an intro,
so
Robert,
I'll
to
just
just,
briefly say my past is a little
yeah.
different because when I was 21, I left home and I did 10 6-month trips back to back. Every year I left for 6 months and I crossed a continent. Back then, you could just show up at a border in Tanzania and pay $10 and they'd let you through. So I hit over 100 countries before I was 30, really saw a lot of the world. And then I spent 18 years in Sedona, settled down, raised 3 daughters, and now I'm single again, and I feel like I want to do something, So I've been speaking to all the schools in the Verde Valley this last summer, and I've got a nice 3-part talk that I wanted to share with you today. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I'm really excited to hear more about it. I haven't heard Robert before. Now he's worked with our school, our students. What's the transformation you're hoping for? And then we'll dive right in.
Okay, well, I've talked for the last 20 years. I'm an author. I've got a dozen novels. I've won like 15 awards for them. And I've talked for years to libraries and students. But I was always talking about my book or telling my daughter's friends animal stories. I wasn't really trying to do anything. And, I was a journalist in Central America. I covered what was going on there, the Contras, and it was my most violent trip. I was twice I had someone unload a gun, point a machine gun at me and unload it and not hit me somehow. And I really, in the end, I was covering Noriega's expulsion from Panama. I had hepatitis and I couldn't go to a hospital. The country was falling and everyone said they're shooting Americans in the hospital beds. So I just kept trying to get out of the country. And eventually I got caught by a mob of about 200 people that beat me unconscious. And I woke up in a hospital in Quito, Ecuador. And because of that, the newspaper gave me a break. And that's why every winter they let me write 6 features and I would do another trip. So it was actually my big break. But
Wow.
through some things like that, I've experienced fear so intensely that, I got a white streak in my hair once from it. And I mean, I've been chased by everything from a bull elephant to a man with a meat cleaver who chased me at least 4 miles in Morocco, which is like unbelievable. And 3 naked men who chased me in Istanbul. I never found out why the man in Morocco was chasing me, but I do know why the men in Istanbul were chasing me.
Oh my
But
God.
anyway, I
So is
really
that
learned to deal with.
is like
What was that?
fear part of your core
Yeah, what I try
method?
to do, like for younger kids, the first leg that I'm going to talk about, I'll keep it simple. And I tell animal stories, but they all kind of have a theme where I try to show there's fear, and then the opposite of that is curiosity. And fear pushed into the future is worry. And those are just the terms I use that kids like and they understand a little bit. But like the first story that I opened with, it's about a time that I was in Zimbabwe camping. It was a full moon, and I used to love walking around on the full moon, just by myself trying to get near animals. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it was just incredible doing that when I was in my 20s. And I got back to my tent. I was hot. I couldn't sleep, and I left the thing unzipped. And I'm writing in my journal, and I had a candle going. And I glanced out the window, and about 10 feet away, I saw a shadow. And as I focused on it, it turned out it was a lioness. And she walked right into my tent and stood right in front of me. It happened so quick, and I wasn't ready for it, that I just fell on my side. I had tunnel vision. All I could really see was her face. And she walked around me once and then came over and put her muzzle right in my jugular. It smelled me right here. And I just thought I was going to die. I thought, if she licks me, it's all over. I'll just die. But after a couple minutes, she kept looking at the candle. It unnerved her a little bit, and she just walked away. For me, the rest of my life, I had a firm definition of what true fear was. It took me 5 minutes to move to get up and zip the tent shut. And I've always been afraid of cats since then. It's so with kids, that's something they haven't heard, and I go into fight, flight, or collapse. And that's my example of collapse. The next one, flight. I have a couple fun stories. I talk about someone warned me about a hippo in a puddle on a dark, rainy night in Uganda. And of course, I didn't believe him. So as I'm leaning over the puddle, looking into it, saying there's no hippo here, right in front of me, this mouth opens up. It's like someone popped the hood on a car. And I almost fell right into it. And I remember just turning briefly for a second. And then after that, the next time I kind of came back to my senses, I had run like 50 feet away. Like I was just so scared that I just hyperplaned right out of there. And so those two kids kind of get. Flight and collapse are things that can happen to you under extreme situations. For pause, what I talk about, the story that I'll give you, and this is the end of that first leg, is my dad was up in northern Maine. We have a cabin there. And it's a mile down a street, way, way up near the top of Maine. There's nobody around. About halfway down, there's a house us kids called the Dead Man's House, because a guy had died in it, and they left all the furniture as it was. It looked like something right out of a Stephen King novel. It's scary as heck, My dad's at the camp alone, and he gets a call that someone had broken into the place, and they asked if he'd check on it on his way out. Of course, he forgot to and didn't remember till he was driving out that night. And by that point, there's a full moon over the house. It looks abandoned. Of course, he doesn't have a flashlight. He does have a 45 on him. He always kept a gun when he went up to Maine from when he was in the Army. So he goes into the house. He sees the basement door that's kicked in, starts walking in, and right away realizes there's no light at all. And he gets turned around. And so he's stumbling around in the dark with his hands in front of him. At one point, he walked into a post. He said he almost shot it. He had his gun out then. And he's got his gun out, and he's thinking, there's no one here. This is stupid. So he's walking around trying to leave, and all of a sudden he walks into something, and it grunts. And it's big. And he can't tell what it is, but he can hear it breathing right in front of him. And he's just covered, overcome with fear, trying to decide what to do. He had been in the Army, so he knew enough just to shoot something in the dark. But he says, I got to get out of here. And as he turns, something brushes his forehead, and it's a switch. It's a light cord. And it's what he'd been looking for all along, So he puts his hands on it, but he's waiting, And me, I heard this story when I was 12. And at 12 years old, I knew if I pulled that cord, there'd be a werewolf right in front of me. I would have just been terrified of my imagination. And he still had his hand on his gun, and he paused long enough. Right there, he said, I stopped long enough to realize it's got to be an animal or maybe a drunk person, and I should slow down. So he paused in that moment and redirected himself, put his gun back in the holster, still kept his hand on it, pulled the switch. And then right on his feet was a giant black bear that was hibernating, that had busted the door down and come into the dark. So with the light on, he marked where the door was, turned it off, left, told his friend they let it spend the winter there. They didn't mess with it. So when I tell kids that story, later on we jump back to that moment. You're in fear, pause, put your finger on that cord, and wait a minute before you pull it and decide what we're going to do. So that's as far as I go with the first leg with young kids.
Robert, that's cool. I'm imagining the audience and the fun of getting to hear your stories. And the takeaway of, oh, the students are eventually going to leave the gymnasium or wherever they are with you, and they're going to remember those stories, right? They're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that was wild, that was incredible, remember that guy, and
Yeah.
he had a lion in his tent and his friend bumped into a bear. And I'm wondering the whole time, like, what's the thing they're going to remember attached to all those stories? And I love that what you just said is like, fear is going to happen to you. Like, that's pretty much an inevitable part of life. We're going to be fearful of things, and it's a natural response, right? And we have natural ways we deal with it. But to pause, to not make the decision right away, we might not be in the best headspace, but to pause and then turn on the light.
And on the third chapter, when I start bringing in different explorers, you really see how, wow, that pivoted everything. It's okay. So the second leg is, I call it Oscar the stoic gorilla. Okay, so I'll jump through this because it's really about me. I wanted to see mountain gorillas, and everybody told me I couldn't. They said it's the wrong time of the year. There's war going on in Rwanda, and that just set me off. You couldn't tell me I couldn't do something, especially if it involved a journey that was arduous. That's what I lived for back then. So I crossed Uganda in the back of a pickup truck with like 25 locals, all with a tarp over us in the rain, sliding off the road, all of us. You really get to know everyone. It was one of the most horrific and beautiful things I've ever done, to really get to know that many people. But we eventually got to the border. We hiked up into the Virunga volcanoes. We stayed one night there, and then the next day we spent about 4 hours looking for the gorillas. We found them. There were just mothers and young. There was a little one that was actually crawling up on my lap. He kept trying to take my bandana, and we were sitting on a piece of bamboo. And at one point, the guards were really nervous because there was a thunderstorm going on, and it was just really booming. But the gorillas seemed okay until the branch I was on broke, and I fell on the little one, and he screamed, and suddenly the Oscar, the silverback, charged. They could hear him coming like 200 yards away. He just came right up to me, knocked me sideways, roared at me, shook me around, looked to make sure I didn't have a weapon. He smelled me to see what pheromones I was giving off, and then he stared in my eyes the way a human would. And you're not supposed to anthropomorphize animals, but for me, it was one of the most human experiences I've ever had with an animal. I felt he could read me like a book, And then after that, he sat down, he crossed his arms, and he didn't look at me again. He looked through me as if to say, you're not worth my worry anymore. And I thought he was being very stoic. I thought it was something he practiced from being a leader, And it also struck me, as me with 3 daughters, if I thought someone was a threat to my daughter, even if he was giving out candy and telling stories and everybody loved him, even 2 or 3 years from now, I would still watch him. I wouldn't forget that I'd been warned about it, With the gorilla, though, it's different. They truly are stoic. Until I did something different, he wasn't going to acknowledge that. And he was going to really, truly enjoy the moment with his family. So the reason I tell this story is when I left my encounter with the gorilla, I went back to the hut, and there was a woman serving us, I think it was rice and beans. And I said, when do you think the storm's going to end? And she gave me a strange look, and she said, there's no storm. She goes, that's war. So the whole time I'd been in the mountains, there'd been shelling going on in the valley below us. Probably 10,000 people died that day when I had a peaceful afternoon with the gorillas. The gorillas knew it wasn't a storm. They knew it was war. But Oscar decided, in his mind, the way he looked at it, until the shelling gets closer, we're going to enjoy our moment, because there's always going to be a storm on the horizon. You really gotta enjoy the moment. And he's got a separate part of his brain. If the shelling got closer, he would flip to that, and that's the man of action. And that gorilla would leave everyone to safety. But they didn't really mix, and I really, ever since then, when I got older, in my 30s and 40s, I started reading about the Stoics, and so how much they could really help you to just learn to accept the world the way it is, or accept a situation the way it is. And, you come home from work on a Friday, you've had a really horrible day at work, nothing's going to change until Monday, but up to 95% of your brain could be taken over by thinking about that constantly. Right. And to know a primate species that's got 98% of the same genes as ours, that in so many ways, right down to staring into his eyes, they seem similar, but he's got a brain that doesn't react to things until change comes. And I've always wished on that Friday I could have come home and put a filter on my brain that says, unless something new comes in, we're not going to think about this till Monday morning, because there's no benefit to it.
Wow. There's like probably a powerful correlation between that. Like, as I'm listening through your stories through the lens of substance use prevention and helping keep kids away from harmful things. And I'm thinking of this, what we call in the field, risk and protective factors. And if someone's living in a home where there are gunshots going off and there are things like that, and they don't have food on the table, it's a really rough environment, just like that one you were in, but you didn't know any different. Like, you just thought there was a storm going on around you. And a lot of like some students that are going through that same experience, it's like, oh, no, this is life. This is what it
Yeah.
looks like. And what's tough is then it makes us more at risk for risky behaviors like substance use because growing up in that environment. And what's interesting about your story is there's two ways to look at it, right? Is the first way is, oh, it's just normal, so I just deal with it. But it also can be a powerful motivator to want something different, right? A different kind of life.
Yeah.
And both are important to be able to say, shoot, I'm stuck in this situation that I can't change. So I've got to just deal with it, maybe block out the noise. But then as soon as I am in control and I can do something about it, I want to get out or I want to be safe.
Yeah.
So
And that's, in that pause, that's one of the things you can do there. You can say, I can't react to this, but when the time comes, this is what I'll do. And that gives you extra reassurance that you can just kind of relax. You know, I had a lot of anxiety, 3 years ago, and I've slowly been learning how to come out of that. I discovered ecstatic dance, and now I do zouk and bachata. And, it's just been so fun to kind of get out there.
That's really
cool.
When
I get into the third leg, one of the things that I connect, I kind of flash back to fight, flight, or collapse and show that. But now when I'm talking about it, I actually say, initially we said that collapse and flight are two things you can't control. But people that, like Ramsey's Ocean, she swims with great white sharks. They asked her how she does it. And she says, you have to not be afraid, because they can smell that. They can sense that. So when they think you're prey if you act afraid. She said, I've got a picture of her right in front of a giant great white, and she's got her hand on it. So, well, that's the thing, so some people can control those, but let's focus on the fight, because it's not necessarily, or rarely is it actually fighting. It's resistance of some kind. So when I talk about explorers, I like explorers because they're creative people. I remember listening to a podcast that had a bunch of astronauts, and they were talking about one of the Challengers that burnt up on reentry. And they said, we know now they died a horrible death. Why isn't there a button that if you know you're going to die in 5 minutes, you press it? And the thing is, if that might have worked for, say, FBI agents. If you have high anxiety, don't go to NASA. They don't want you. That's what you go to the FBI. They want paranoid people. That's what finds criminals, is people that can think like that. NASA wants creative people. And the men that were in that panel, they all were asked that question about the kill switch. And one of them said, if you told me I was going to die in 5 minutes, I would think I've got 5 minutes to figure this out. And in that 5 minutes, he goes, most likely, if it's one of my systems involved, I can buy another minute or two. And the guy next to him says, we all work as a team. If he could get a minute, I could get a minute. And maybe between all of us, we could make 10 minutes. And maybe that's enough to survive. So I like explorers. They look at things in a unique way. One of the stories I tell is about a man, Peter Frunchen, born in 1888, a famous Danish explorer. Did all these journeys. He married an Inuit wife. He was curious. He learned how the Inuit survived. He was 7 foot tall, and in his furs, he looked massive. And you look at this guy and you think nothing could stop him. Well, he was crossing Greenland one time. A storm hit. The temps dropped down to 25 below. Snow was coming down. The dogs went underground, and he crawled under his sled to shelter for the night. He woke up in the morning completely encased in snow, and he couldn't break the sled free. He tried for 2 hours, got himself covered with sweat, exhausted, and passed out, still couldn't break out. When he woke up, he discovered that his exertion, the breathing, the sweat had turned everything around him to solid ice. So now he's really stuck, and his beard and his hair is frozen. And to show you how much of a true explorer he was, later on when he talked about it, he said, I looked around and I realized this is not good. He didn't say, I'm going to die here. He did refer to it as an ice coffin, but he sat there and he paused. He said, I thought, because I knew if I just had a tool, I could get out. He tried to take his bare fur mittens and put saliva on them and try to punch his way through, and it just broke apart. And he figured he had about 4 hours left before he was going to be dead. And he thought, what do I have? I need a tool. And he remembered that the dog poop froze, he said, as hard as steel into little pellets that he'd seen in the snow. And then he realized he'd been traveling for 4 days and hadn't had a bowel movement. So he's pulling his hair free and his beard free, had a bowel movement. And then over the next 2 hours, every 15 minutes, he rolled it 90 minutes on its side until after 2 hours, it was frozen as hard as steel, and he used it to chisel out.
No way.
It's a true story. He was a member of the club. They got a portrait of him on the wall. And it's because of his he was an incredible explorer on top of that. But, it was things like that just set you aside. And really,
oh my God,
it's the only substance he had on him. But,
right.
And what I liked about him was he chiseled his way out. He crawled 5 miles to a place where there was an Inuit that took care of him. He stayed there 2 days. She cut off a big chunk of his leg and several toes and fingers. And then 2 days later, he walked limped 5 miles back to get his dogs and then rescued them. But he kept exploring. But believe me, I could go on for about 3 hours about different explorer stories like that. And like I said earlier, I would relate them to the kids also, to things that they could come,
Robert, I want to ask you some advice, because stories are so powerful. They're memorable. We relate to them. They can inspire us. And I sat here just listening to multiples of stories with ease. You seem to be very good at telling them. How can you teach us what are the pieces of a good story? Or like, how do you do this?
Some of these I've been telling for a while, but I think some of them, like Peter Frinton's story, some of those stories tell themselves, and I like stories. I don't like stories that make people look bad. I like to have a good theme to them, but I think almost anything you can do can turn into a great story. And I had friends in high school that used to say that to me, why is it that we did the same thing, but when you tell your story, it's better than me telling my story?
Yeah. And what is that?
I don't know. I'm a novelist. Maybe I know when to wait for the punchline or when to build things up. My parents were both storytellers. And when I traveled, that was the thing about going 10 years before the internet. None of the people I knew what a cell phone was until like 94. If you were in India in 1990 or in Zimbabwe in the late 80s, everyone sat around on the roof telling stories, this is what we just did. And that you'd tell you a big story. So yeah, I love storytellers. The Explorers Club has great storytellers,
Yeah, that's so cool. Because there's something simple about a conflict, right? That you don't know how they're going to get out of, like the last one.
Yeah.
And then the solution. But for some reason though, it is like that, Robert. I have friends that could take an amazing premise and you're like, they try to tell a 10-minute story out of it and it stinks. And you're like, wait, why'd you add this information? This wasn't relevant. This was and then there's ones that people that are good storytellers and it seems to go flawlessly from start to finish.
It's nice to have something to tie it into. Like the stories that I tell now, like in the third leg of my talk, we go into the pause and to either take action or to be stoic about it. But I also have two other sections. One's called Rules for Survival, and the other's called Respect. So one way that I deal with fear is I'm terrified of saltwater crocs. I've spent about a year in Australia, and they are just the scariest thing. You can reason a little bit with a grizzly bear, maybe with an elephant, but saltwater croc you can't. So my way of giving that respect, when I went back after one time, because I had my daughters and they were younger, and I was really afraid. I said, all right. I looked up, and 90% of all croc deaths happen in the water. So I said, until I feel comfortable, we're not going near the water. With that one little rule there, suddenly my whole trip got easier because I knew I could break it if I wanted to, but it would be my call, And the rules for survival, those were things that people said to me that I also like to talk about because I've had a lot of really good advice in my life that I didn't hear at the time. Usually there was so much going on in my head. My father's given me advice that didn't sink in for 20 years. I like to listen to those voices. And when I traveled, my first novel is about each chapter has a different, I call them rules for survival, something that somebody said to me that saved me. And they're just for me. But if I said them to you, take shelter when you can find it. Cream rises. Nobody move, nobody gets hurt. Things like that someone said that saved me, that I kind of keep those in the back of my mind. And when I have a panic session, and I'm experiencing fear, I think, is there anything there that saved me? And it could be something simple, like don't talk to Fred before he's had his coffee. It really, there are things that save you that in my pause, that's what comes to me. And can I get what I'm afraid of? Can I give it any respect so that I can step away from it?
Yeah. Okay, this is good. I want to do this before we give, we're going to leave people with ways to get in touch with you and things like that. But I want to pull out my notes from what you did. And I think that if our audience is thinking of their craft, you're helping save young lives from addiction. And we could share stats and surveys and you'll see the eyes gloss over or you'll see them pull out their device because we're not captivating. And what's really cool about storytelling is you give something for the brain to attach the information to and to remember it. You're also establishing a lot of relatability. So one thing that Robert did really well is he would tease information in the beginning of his stories that we didn't even realize he was setting up a problem to happen. And you started to do it when you talked about crocodiles. Hey, I'm afraid of crocodiles. And now I'm talking about a story. Like that's going to tell you that maybe something's going to happen with a crocodile, or 90% happened in the water, things like that. I was out on a safari. You're building the setting, but you're implanting little details so that you don't have to tell it later.
Mm.
I feel like that's a masterful move. Another one is that you're letting us live the experience with you. Like the lion, I was glued to the ground and the lion slowly went around me, nuzzled my neck. And if you're on YouTube, like you saw, he put his hand up to his neck. So you're like reliving the moment with him. You're kind of nervous and you're thinking, what's going to happen? And he's saying it in present tense. Like you're living this moment with him, which is really good. And then the final thing I'll pull out is, you just talked about it now, but there's a little phrase that's the lesson that needs to stick with you. And your first story did it so well that I still remember, is that, you know, he pulled the light string by that bear and it was that moment to pause. Like I still remember that lesson because that was a little phrase that I can glue back to the story. And I can remember that next time I feel afraid. And in our industry of speaking, at least what my friends call it, a phrase that pays, meaning it's the phrase that people remember. And if they remember it, then you can go on and tell it again. So you said like the things that saved you. And when we're speakers doing this kind of work, or we're presenting life-saving information, it really could be the things that save someone. So this is really, really fascinating. Robert, can you tell us more about what you're up to now, as far as like if you have a next goal for your program, and then where to find out more about it?
Right now I'm still doing all the schools in the Verde Valley, and I'm trying different jokes and seeing what works and what doesn't. But I've targeted about 50 different events across America that I'm trying to get into. I want this next year to be a good speaking year for me. So I'm actively looking for places I can speak. About a third of the events I've targeted are either no or little pay, but they're the ones that I care about, you know, and that's, so I'm trying to jumpstart some speaking gigs, but I'm also really trying to get in front of kids and talk to people. So I'm Arizona based, although I do have a cabin up in northern Maine, so I spend part of the year up there.
Okay. And
I'm doing a lot with the Explorers Club too. We do a program called EC Cubs, which puts 2 explorers in front of 5 to 11-year-olds each quarter, and it's in a different part of the Southwest. So
and listening to your stories, I'm also imagining that younger age group. Is that your ideal age range? Is that elementary to early middle school?
You know, I love the younger ones because I just stick on leg one and I tell animal stories, and that's fun. But I did the Verde Valley School. It's a baccalaureate school up here. I did their class for human intelligence, and it was a bunch of international seniors that were all just incredibly smart. And I really got to delve into it a little bit. So it really doesn't matter to me. You know, I mean, the one place that I haven't really gotten myself excited for is doing like a big HR conference for Colgate. You know, I mean, you can turn it, I can make it helpful. I can, but it's not like talking to a bunch of teenagers about Africa. It's not as fun for me. So,
that's cool. Where can people go to check out your, what you're up to?
My website, robertlouisdemayo.com.
Awesome.
Or they can email me, or DeMayo07.
Okay, perfect. All right, Robert, thank you for sharing all your stories, for meeting me on here just so we could get to know each other.
This has been great. I've had so much fun. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah, of course. And for everyone else that's listening, please keep up the life-saving work. Hopefully you took away some little skills, or maybe just you can tell Robert's story. You have a new friend named Robert who talks about this stuff, and maybe it clues into what you do. Maybe you have an event coming up that you can send him an email and see if he might be a good fit to come help y'all out with the students. But either way, keep up the life-saving work. We will see you all next Monday for another episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour podcast. If you love the show, make sure to leave a review and share what you've learned. And if you need help reducing substance use among youth by educating and engaging students in prevention, visit vive18.com for more information, tools, and resources.